one rookie quarterback not getting enough love, the implosion of my beloved Raiders, and the worst battling for first. We've got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Inside Coverage. All right, by now you guys know who I am. I'm the idiot. They're the professionals, but it is time for Inside Coverage. Yahoo Sports senior NFL reporters Charles Robinson and Jori Epstein. You know what, guys, I'm just going to throw myself under the bus. I said ESPN earlier when we started the show. They cut it out because they want me to look professional. I did it. I fell into traps because I'm still in my feels after a rough weekend. It's just been one of those weeks. Guys, I'm trying to figure out how to move forward because we've got a lot to get to. We will get to a lot. But C-Rob, we're in this weird moment in the NFL where we're 3 weeks in, and I know there are a few really good teams, and I'm not sure what the hell the rest of what we're looking at is.
It was funny. I was doing a piece on Caleb Williams and just sort of how this is going to be a pivotal weekend for him, and we're going to talk about that later in the show. But when I went back and I was looking at teams that ended up with the first overall pick, the Houston Texans, the year before they took Jadeveon Clowney, so obviously the season you earn your pick for the following year. They started 2-0, and then they lost 14 straight. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, how many teams are looking at 2-1 who are just they're celebrating, thinking we're great, we're good, we're set in the right direction. There are a number of 2-1 teams, I'll call it right now, that are going to be 6-11, 5-12. 7-10, and right now they think they've got the franchise turned in the right direction. No, we're way too early right now.
But see, Jori, this is my constant. It's never too early to remind everybody of this. There are two very different qualifiers. The statement, did my team win a lot of games, is not the same as the statement, is my team any good? As a fan, just put my fan hat on. We get obsessed with wins and losses, but sometimes when you look at what we see, you just got to realize that bad teams win some games, good teams lose some games to Cowboys, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we wholesale change what we think of these teams after a couple of weeks. That's the hardest part. Wins and losses this early in the season don't necessarily mean good or bad.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I also think there's good or bad now and good or bad of what are you actually going to do in the postseason, which is what matters. I mean, you're putting on the fan hat, but for me as a reporter, having covered the Cowboys for 7 years, it's it's great that they got 12-5 both of the last seasons. But how excited were fans about that in March when they blew it again in the playoffs? And so there's sort of a how good are you, and also how good are you in the biggest moments? Because is a November win really what you're looking for? That is not where it needs to peak.
Look, I'll take a win wherever I can get one. The one thing that I can't wrap my head around, and not just for my favorite team, but for several favorite teams, I don't know that I've ever seen a weekend where more teams were failed by their head coach than I did this weekend. I would argue that the Raiders and Josh McDaniels' decision was absolutely stupid. I would argue that the Vikings getting up to the line of scrimmage with roughly 30 seconds to play and being incapable of spiking the ball when every fat guy sitting on a couch somewhere was screaming, spike the ball! They couldn't figure that out. And I'm also sitting here wondering through all of it, how the hell Brandon Staley still has a job, right? I was stunned watching the end of the Chargers game when you see a 4th and 1 for a team that has run the ball so poorly, Jori. All of a sudden I'm looking at this and saying, is Brandon Staley actively trying to get fired? Is he tired of being a head coach?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. And I think it's also okay, they scrape by with this one. They've got, as you know quite well, your Raiders this weekend, but then they've got the Cowboys and the Chiefs right after. And so this could have gone really bad. I mean, it's a little bit early per NFL history to get rid of a coach. It's usually 4 or 5. I feel 5 games in is where we start even really thinking about it, or by we start really thinking about the owners thinking about it. But I don't know. I mean, you've got a couple things. He's the head coach, so game management is crucial in terms of how he's being evaluated. And then he's a defensive mind, so his defense is how he plays. Really, this is not about the offense. This is about those two things. And if those two things don't start looking better, you certainly have to question next season. And the question is, can he even make it through this year?
See, Rob, though, Mike Williams' torn ACL changes the entire offense, but it's also just one of those every year. If you're a Chargers fan, every year there's some catastrophic injury that seems to be debilitating, and then you can't trust your head coach. I don't know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they won, probably shrouded some of this, right? I mean, I think if they lose that game, we're probably, the pitchforks are out. Everyone's storming the Bastille, and Brandon Staley's probably looking at potentially getting fired sooner than what we might
Are
have
there
thought.
enough Chargers fans in LA to storm?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, no, let's not go into the Chargers thing. They always get mad when we make fun about, how many Chargers fans there are. But look, it's not just the Mike Williams injury, which is par for to me, it tracks, right? Every season with whether it's Mike Williams or some other key player or a multitude of key players with the Chargers, we have injury issues. We have coaching decision issues, right? Where we're looking at Brandon Staley and we're saying he did X when it should have been Y. We criticize him for that for a while. And then all of a sudden he should be doing Y and he starts doing X. And we're like, why? Like, he always seems a little bit backward in how he's calling games. But even beyond that, J.C. Jackson was a healthy scratch in this game. A cornerback that you went out and you signed for, what was it, $80 million? I mean, he's got like a $16 million, cap hit every year. You cannot have a key free agent like that now a healthy scratch on your team, right? When you need, particularly defensively at that position, that's money that you can't just light on fire. So it's not just injuries. It's not just play calling, but it's some of the systematic decisions they've made to build that team that also alarm me. It's, again, had it been a loss, I think it's a far bigger storyline, and had, as you said, a multitude of other coaches not made decisions where we're sitting there going, what the hell is going on? Particularly Josh McDaniels. And we'll get into that. Had that not been how the night was capped, I think Brandon Staley's getting skewered a little more viciously than he already is.
So, C-Rob, when you ask these questions about the personnel and the team construction that seem like bigger questions, how much do you put that on Staley, General Manager Tom Telesco, or a mix?
I mean, look, when you're signing a free agent, like, coaches weigh in, but ultimately that's a general manager's, that's their porch, right? That's the front door. You're managing the talent flow on that team. And it was a player, again, in talking about Jackson, that the Raiders did not make the big push to keep him. And historically, that is a position that the Raiders would pay if they truly felt like this was an elite number one cornerback. I mean, look, Malcolm Butler was a guy that at one point they reached for. Darrelle Revis, when the next contract comes up, Darrelle Revis was a guy that they paid. So when a corner leaves the Patriots, particularly with, I would say, a resume that, while he was there, it wasn't like every single year this was an elite player. He kind of built into that great, peak season. And then the Patriots let him walk. That's a player I'm always a little, nervous about. And, for the Chargers to be making him a healthy scratch at this point, even if it's just to make a point, even if it's, hey, we still don't feel like he's back where he needs to be, missed the majority of last season with an injury, still alarming. And yeah, I'd put that on the general manager. It's not just about the head coach there when you have a player of that magnitude that is now sitting on your bench and not contributing, and he's supposedly healthy.
Also, just a reminder of how we need to sort of pull back a little bit the way we treat day one of free agency, because J.C. Jackson being signed was one of the big gets. Like, everybody was trying to make a bid for him. They get him. But there's a couple of things here that you guys have said that have really sort of piqued my mind here. Number one, without trashing Chargers fans, because you're right, like, it's unfair to say there's only a few of them. It's a common joke. I will say this. I do think the fact that the fan base isn't as loud and as rabid does offer a different set of standards. Like, when you are talking about the Jets or the Giants, like, there's 1,000 questions happening. That just doesn't happen in LA for the Chargers. So the fans are part of this conversation, because I don't think Brandon Staley would have survived as the head coach in a higher profile media market that cared more about the actual wins and losses of their football team. I'm not saying that to trash Chargers fans. I'm just saying that is the reality around it. But the other part of it is, when we did a little soundbite stuff last week, and we laughed about Staley saying, last year's not carrying over. Is this not another example of, okay, last year may not carry over, but your identity is your identity. And your identity right now in these situations flat out sucks. Like, you can't run the football when you haven't run the football the whole game. It's your the negative 23-yard line with a couple of minutes left against a quarterback that should be smart enough to beat you. Like, Brandon Staley put his team in a situation to lose. That's not carryover. Jori, that's just identity. I think it's more what we talked about last week.
Right, and it's that situational awareness of Austin Eckler's not active and healthy for the game. Don't act like he is. Justin Herbert's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Act like he is, and sort of making those decisions, understanding your personnel and what's actually likely to work rather than just what the numbers tell you.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting because there's a ton of pressure, right? There's just a ton of pressure when you've paid Justin Herbert the way he's been paid. I think there's a ton of pressure moving forward. Speaking of quarterbacks and Justin Herbert, one quarterback that seems to be not feeling any pressure and absolutely outplaying expectations early on. Let's give a little shout out to CJ Stroud, because certainly a lot of hype for this year's rookie class of quarterbacks. But what have we seen so far? Anthony Richardson missing some time. Bryce Young misses some time. CJ Stroud just comes in and is at 121 passes to start a career without an interception. He's played really efficiently, C-Rob. And I think, like, as much as last week, there were some questions, hey, should Anthony Richardson have been picked higher? CJ Stroud's just doing what he's done throughout his career. He's playing smart football and doing exactly what he's asked to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to somebody with the Texans coming out of that game, and I mean, they're overjoyed. I mean, they know it's such a huge step that he took, to be able to have the day that he did, beat a team like the Jaguars. The offensive line's messy right now. I mean, there's all kinds of injuries there. They're dealing with guys banged up. So it's really suboptimal conditions that he put a game like this up. And not only that, he did it with Tank Dell, who it's crazy. You have this receiver who comes out of the University of Houston. You're talking about guys like 5'9"-ish, 165 pounds. Like, I heard he was playing at Houston at like 160 pounds. Everyone's like, I remember going to the Senior Bowl and people are like, a DB can't stick with this guy. Like, it's insane. But his size, everyone, you talk to teams across the board, they go, but where does he fit? No one who's 160 pounds survives, or 165, or even if they get him to 170, it's so hard to survive and thrive at the wide receiver position in the NFL unless he's just going to be a slot. Well, he played the vast majority of his snaps outside of the slot, and he puts up a monster game against the Jaguars and looks as uncoverable as he did, I think, in the draft run-up. That was a player they took in the third round, and you know why they took him? Because CJ Stroud worked with him and said, we need to go draft Tank Dell. So there's this extra additional layer in that game of not only do you have the quarterback who you need to be your franchise player, but going through the draft process, he pointed at a guy and said, that's a guy. That's our guy. Like, we got to go get him. And then in the big pivotal moment where he takes a step forward, it's the guy he's throwing to the most. I think Dell, I want to say off the top of my head, like 7 targets, 5 completions, big, huge plays, huge, I think, sigh of relief for the Houston Texans, because there were times in the preseason where when there were not clean pockets for CJ Stroud, it looked a little worrisome. Like, is this guy going to be able to make it on the NFL level, not having that pristine jersey that he had at Ohio State? The Jacksonville game, I think, proved a lot, and for their confidence and this franchise, when you're talking about so much change that occurred in the offseason, it's a big deal.
When you combine that with the fact that Will Anderson is out, like, let's not get it twisted. On draft day, it was like, wow, that's aggressive. I mean, for Houston to walk out with what they feel is their building block on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, and to have them both play, like, maybe we should be recalibrating our expectations a little bit for where Houston is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you should recalibrate that, oh, this is a team that's going to contend this year, but I think this is a team that has the talent and the culture being set this year. The tone is being set this year to really allow them to be a force next year. And I think that you can question the moves they made on draft day, and they definitely were bold moves, but really what it comes down to is, do you hit on those moves? If you hit on those moves, no one really cares. I mean, think about it. Like, the San Francisco 49ers traded 3 firsts for Trey Lance, and then a few years later, they're giving away for the 4th. So if you hit on CJ Stroud, if you hit on Will Anderson, does it really matter if you traded away a pick or two? I mean, like, you can go so many picks and not find a guy like either of them too. And obviously it's still early, but I think that the returns are very promising, and you got to give head coach D'Amico Ryans a lot of credit for it.
To add on to what Jori said, if you're going to hit at the positions that matter, right? I mean,
Yes.
If you hit at quarterback, hit at edge rusher, hit at, program setting players. D'Amico Ryans, part of the reason why he went out and he got Will Anderson was because in the draft process, and again, this is talking to people in Houston, he said, this guy reminds me of me. Like, he's going to come in and he's going to set a mentality in the locker room. We need our offensive leader, our offensive centerpiece, our offensive anchor. That's going to be CJ Stroud. they went and got Will Anderson because D'Amico Ryan said, that is the dog. That's the mentality guy we need who's going to be that anchor defensively. And oh, by the way, why not bring them in the same year where we can watch these two players really grow together on the opposite sides of the ball, lead a locker room together. I think, again, this is a step in that process. A lot of this has to do with, D'Amico Ryans and that staff also identifying players now, and we're pretty late in the process. Not like the front office is new in Houston, but starting to identify players who can be long-term difference makers. A lot of the noise in the past, I think, is starting to recede for Houston.
I agree with all that, but I think there's even still another piece of brilliance, which is that quarterback and edge rusher are the lucrative positions that just cost so much when they get to the next contract. And now you've got potentially a franchise quarterback and a cornerstone edge rusher, 5 years of their rights on a rookie deal. I mean, that's
7
incredible.
if you play off the franchise tags too, right? I mean,
well, you can't get them both on franchise tags.
I was factor. Well, yeah, but I mean, we'll flip flop that, right? I mean, but at least seven for one, that's for sure. And we've seen how it went with the Giants between Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, so it's possible to juggle the two.
I also think, to your points that you both made, there's just a level of go back to the draft strategy. Like you drafted two guys that felt pretty sure, that had a lot of tape. Like you didn't get creative. Like I'm the first to admit I have no sense of direction in life. I can't get from my house to the bar that I like to go to that's 15 minutes away without Waze. Like I have to plug in Waze everywhere I go. It's just the force of habit, the first thing I do. And I don't think. Once I'm driving, like if Waze tells me to turn right into a river, I'm going to turn right into a river. I am there not to think. I'm just doing exactly what the playbook tells me. So often in the draft, teams start with Waze and then they get halfway through and they're like, nah, there's a smarter way to do this. And before you know it, they're lost. Like every fan listening to this has watched their team suddenly veer off and take somebody they didn't need to take. CJ Stroud was, of all the quarterbacks, the guy that had the least question marks and had the most tape on him that showed you exactly what you thought he could be. Will Anderson Jr. had the most tape on him and exactly what you needed to see. Like Houston, all they did was follow the roadmap brilliantly, and sometimes that's impossible to ask your favorite team to do during the draft. So, like, I got to give them credit. If this thing turns around, because how many people have been saying, well, Houston could have a top 5 pick again next year. They don't look like a top 5 team in the draft. They look like a team that's building towards something that could be good. Much like my Raiders. No, they don't. Look, I was just trying to segue it into it. C-Rob, I have to be honest with you, man, while we're having a little confessional here. I say mean things about you every Sunday, specifically about you. And it's not because I don't love you. It's because the first time we worked together, it might have been a test episode before we were even live, like when we were just getting our feel for each other. You said teams around the league are looking at Davante Adams, and when the Raiders suck, Davante Adams could be on the trade block. Now all I think every time I watch my beloved Raiders suck and Davante Adams come out afterwards and be very vocal about what isn't right, I just think about you, because he knows at this point, one or two things happens. Either the culture gets turned around and, hey, Davante did that, or he's going to talk so much that eventually everybody in the front office is going to be like, just trade him out of here. He doesn't want to be here. Like, am I watching the end of Davante Adams' time with the Raiders right now in front of my eyes every week, C-Rob?
I mean, he's been consistent, okay? Like, it's Davante Adams said in the offseason he wasn't here for a rebuild, right? Like, it's not the first time that he's been vocal about what his expectations are about his time with the Raiders and really this phase of his career. And so, again, when I talked to the front office, I talked to the coaching staff, when you go through the Raiders, and they were aware of it before the season started. They kind of knew what the expectations were from Davante Adams, and they thought, well, we're going to meet it. We're going to be a good team. We're going to be in the thick of it. And that's not something we'll really have to worry about, because that's not our goal. Tanking's not our goal. Losing's not our goal. But look, on the flip side of it, they know that if this is sort of a soft rebuild or a major rebuild or renovation or whatever you want to call it, I know they don't like the rebuild word. We'll call it remodeling, whatever you want to attach to it. I
like remodeling.
Yeah, remodeling.
That feels good.
It feels a lot better.
Hey, C-Rob's column from training camp after he rolled through there had every synonym in the book.
Did not use the word rebuild, though. I did not use the word rebuild.
I like that man was better than a thesaurus.
Yeah. Look, you can stick with remodel. We're going to make that a thing here, because remodel have so much hype and like hope at the end of it. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Well, even in remodeling, sometimes the furniture's got to go. I mean,
don't do this to me. Don't do this to me, C-Rob. All right, let me have my remodeling joy. Go ahead.
But look, the reason I brought it up the first time, when we did that episode, and I talked to you about like Adams being someone that everyone's going to target, is because after you leave the Raiders and people ask you in other teams when you go through, where have you been? And you say the Raiders, there are teams are saying, what are they going to do with Adams? Like, it doesn't seem to make sense with sort of the build there and the financial carry of that contract right now. His paragraph 5 is this financial amount, and that's not that hard to trade. I literally had 2 GMs bring that up. They're like, look at his paragraph 5. I'm like, wow, they're looking at this dude's contract and like how tradable the contract is. And this is in training camp. So it's not surprising here that Adams continues to be vocal because it's late September. Late October is going to be the trade deadline. And if they're not going to be in the playoff mix, I think his expectation is going to be, hey, I want to play somewhere where I can maximize the rest of my window, which might only be, 2 years, maybe if you're super optimistic, 3 years. And that might not necessarily be with the Raiders. I think he wants to make that, hey, now. And you will see teams, and I will tell you right now, late September, don't believe all the bullshit you're going to hear right now about like, oh, the Raiders, and there's already trade talk. There's not trade talks. There's not calls. None of that's happening right now. After mid-October, I can tell you that's when teams are going to start to, their interest is going to be piqued, and they're going to understand where their season's going, and the calls are going to get made that last week, really, of October if the Raiders aren't in the playoff hunt.
I mean, I think what's interesting, though, is like you have Davante Adams saying, I don't want to be here for a rebuild, but you also have that profile of him in May saying that like he wanted to prove that without a great quarterback, he could still be one of the best receivers, and he thought he proved that. So it's like, which do you want? And I understand that two things can be true, that you could have a great defense and other great skill players, but you're not the quarterback alone. But I feel like, I mean, you're the Raiders fanatic over here. Am I missing something? Are those not inconsistent?
They are. I think the thing of it is, when somebody knows they have nothing to lose, they just speak their mind, right? And that's where I feel like Davante is. Like, if the Raiders could be competitive, he would be that. I think the Raiders have 2 dogs in the locker room that aren't going to bite their tongue: Max Crosby, Davante Adams. Here's what the only. Let me be the ultimate fan for a second, though. Just throw this one thing out. If you're the Raiders and this season just goes to hell, and you think there's any chance that you want to at least find out, can Aiden O'Connell play, or you're going to have to draft a quarterback next year? Is there a better situation for a young quarterback to come into than this group of receivers and that running back? The offensive line might not be any good, but man, if you want to see early on if your kid can play, like, I see why if you're the Raiders, you'll pay to keep Davante around, because it's going to accelerate. Even if you're drafting a quarterback next year, you bring in Drake May. Your whole season went to what? Drake May's your new starting quarterback. Drake May throwing to Jacoby Myers and Davante Adams and maybe Hunter Renfrow if they ever decide to throw him the football, and handing off to Josh Jacobs. That's a better situation than most rookies could have. So I see why the Raiders would want to dig in, just to keep the star power and just to keep the ability to continue to develop.
Jori, to answer Jori's question too, I mean, think of when Adams makes that statement. You don't know what's going to happen with Josh Jacobs. You don't know that they're going to go through this sort of protracted holdout in camp, and you're thinking, of course they're going to extend that guy. I mean, he's a centerpiece of the offense. I want to play here with talented players. You don't know that the Chandler Jones situation is going to happen. So I think at that point, it's the offseason. You're trying to, in your way, lead and say, hey, if Derek Carr is not here, it's fine. I'm still able to prove myself being a great player, whether or not the guy I came here to play with or not is here. You have to answer for that. Remember, especially when this was the reason why you wanted to ultimately go to the Raiders. And, to answer Fitz's question about where he would fit from a wide receiver standpoint, I don't know. I mean, we'll sit here now and we'll say there's obvious places. We'll sit there and say, well, Kansas City, and we'll throw out all the teams that we think right now don't have a wide receiver. It was funny this morning. I was actually thinking to myself, like, man, Green Bay Packers could kind of use him right now. I mean, they got all these young receivers. Christian Watson can't get on the field. Some of the young guys are dropping balls. And if he wants to
contend, they should be just fine in that division.
And Jordan Love would probably actually work, given what we've seen from Jordan Love. It's pretty funny, actually, that a place where he would probably thrive right now and fit into a potentially at least a playoff type of atmosphere could be the Green Bay Packers. But we won't know really where he will fit.
You don't want to send him to New Orleans to just keep following his college buddy Derek Carr once Carr's back healthy.
Yeah, I don't think.
Before we move on, I'll ask this one question to both of you. If you were the GM of the Raiders and you were offered a first-round pick today for Davante Adams, would you trade him? C-Rob, would you trade him?
I think it would depend on what the money looks like. I'd have to look at the finances and see ultimately what the Raiders are going to end up paying in terms of his salary, because you're paying basically for a first-round pick at that point. You're offloading a good player. You're giving someone else an asset, and what you're getting in return is a first-round pick. Well, if your cap charge for offloading him if it's immense, you're basically saying, well, we're paying this immense cap charge to get a first round pick. Is this really worth it? And oh, by the way, who are we also trading him to? Is it a team? If it's the Chiefs, I'm sitting there going, okay, that's the 32nd pick in the draft. This is the 31st pick in the draft. It's the 30th pick in the draft. So,
but most of the teams that would want him, I would think, would be down there.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you're only making them better. So you're technically hurting yourself in the midst of trying to help yourself. But I think a lot of this is going to come down to the money. But as I said before, teams are already looking at the money. They're already looking at his paragraph 5 and trying to understand exactly what he's going to be owed and how tradable he is. So if the Raiders do not have something good happen, I think, in the next month, and that could be some wins. It could be, as Fitz said, I don't know if we get a look at O'Connell and maybe that changes how you feel about the complexion of the team going forward. Because if say O'Connell got in there and he puts up a couple of games like the guy we saw in the preseason, then you're like, wait a minute, okay, there's some traction here. Now this doesn't feel so bleak, and you can train. I think you can change some attitudes about what that window would be. But you're a short timer now. You got a month, and your coach just passed on, going for a touchdown twice, and he went for field goals, and now this is where we are.
I looked it up, and according to overthecap.com, right now the dead cap on a trade pre-June 1st would be a $31.4 million hit this year and a $23.5 million hit next year. So, again, don't let finances get in the way of a good idea. It's just going to be complicated to work out. It's not complicated when you have a rookie quarterback, right? We all know that. And everybody's infatuated with Caleb Williams. Let me just start here, Jori. A couple of weeks ago, Caleb Williams' dad was clear. He's not going to go somewhere that has bad culture. And we were like, well, this means the Cardinals can't suck, right? Like, they can't do that. The Cardinals have turned out to be plucky, right? Or just Cardinals putting up a fight. In the meantime, Chicago is over here just the bed over and over and over again. And I'm looking at it saying, man, I don't know. A few weeks ago, Caleb to the Cardinals thought like that was a disaster. Now it's like, I don't know, Caleb might prefer the Cardinals. Jori, this thing has got, whatever team sucks, Caleb Williams is in a bad situation with.
It's also interesting because the Chicago Bears not only have their own pick, they also have the Carolina Panthers pick. So they've got two shots here at getting Caleb Williams. But I know it worked for Eli Manning. I just don't think that he's really going to ultimately have the say here. And I think when it comes around, like, that's great for your dad to say this a year and a half out or a year, whatever, a little under a year out. I don't think that's going to be the thing. I also think, okay, let's say the Bears have one culture now. Well, one, Justin Fields' coaching comments didn't help that culture. And in theory, if they're bringing in a quarterback, that is changing. You don't know what the head coach is going to be like in a year. You don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. So I think it's hard to say that any team's culture right now is necessarily going to reflect it. I mean, think about the Houston end of the Deshaun Watson era. There were a lot of issues going on there, a lot of issues with Bill O'Brien, and now they seem to have a great culture. So I think things can change pretty quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that Caleb Williams' dad is going to be excited about it on the front end, but I also think once that first paycheck and that signing bonus hit the bank account, that can help.
Guys, what are we talking about here? What are we talking about? If you're the first pick in the draft, and I entertained this early on, so I want to be careful here and not just look at total, but the NIL money would have to be $30 million, $40 million, $50 million to outweigh the money that he would earn on the back of his career. Because again, you stay in college, you delay your free agency clock by another year. And if you're an elite level quarterback, guess what? In year 15, look at what elite level quarterbacks are making in this league now. You could be making $70 million in the NFL as an elite level quarterback 15 years from now when we're approaching 2040. And so that's a financial consideration. But then the injury risk, I don't care if you get insurance or not. You have no idea what he goes back to USC for an additional year, suffers a catastrophic knee injury where you tear everything, or an Achilles injury, or who knows what else. What if he goes through a Tua situation where he suffers a multitude of concussions? It's still a dangerous game, and you're still risking a massive amount of money and a draft slot at number 1 overall. And again, Jori brings us up. I wrote a story. We're going into this weird intersection that never happens in the NFL. We have 4 0-3 teams. They all play. They're playing in this little subset, little semifinals here, where we're going to walk out of this weekend with 2 0-4 teams. The percentages, the last 21 drafts, 71.4% of the time, 0-4 teams end up with the number 1 overall pick since the Texans got the number one overall pick as an expansion team in 2002. Okay, so we're going to have a pretty good idea, at least percentage-wise historically, of who could potentially have that pick coming out of this weekend. Well, as Jori said, things can change in Chicago. I know it looks terrible, but if you end up with the number 1 overall pick, whether it's through the Bears record, whether it's through the Panthers record, there's a chance Matt Eberflus may not be there. If you're looking at drafting Caleb Williams, the first thing I'm thinking about is, we built this team for Justin Fields to succeed. Most of those pieces are still going to be there. Why not take this situation and put another quarterback in, maybe hire a coach to coach Caleb, a head coach, like someone we're going to step in this guy's direction as the program reset. Let's put a coach in with him. A lot of teams, lean to do that now. And then you can still trade Justin Fields for assets. And I've talked to a couple of GMs about Justin Fields. They're like, it's not a Trey Lance situation. He has shown an ability to have a nice ceiling, something to reach for as a starter. He's got experience. He probably just needs to be with the right coach. Maybe he does still need to be a backup in some situation, but he's going to be worth an asset. The consternation there, I think, for any team that would add him is that this is year 3 of his contract. We're talking about a year 4, year 5 at this stage, I don't think is going to get picked up. So really, if you were to deal for Justin Fields, you're basically going to get a 1-year look at him and then have to decide how to keep him in the fold after that. But I don't think teams look at Justin Fields the way they did with Trey Lance. I think they look at him as potentially viable elsewhere, that he's in a bad situation in Chicago and would still give up something for him. So if it's Chicago, if it's Arizona, there's going to be some upside, to some of these teams that might have, look, hell, even if it's Denver, right? And they have to split the $85 million cap charge and get rid of Russell Wilson and do a total rebuild. You're still, if you're Caleb Williams, going, well, okay, coming in with Sean Payton. And so if I got to spend the next 10 years of my career with Sean Payton, could be a worse situation for me as a number 1 overall pick.
Fitz is about to jump out of his seat.
Look, I mean this so kindly, but bleep you, all right? Like, if I got to take on Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Caleb Williams for the next 15 years, I'm going to need a liver transplant.
I mean, you might be drafting him, so.
Hey, no, that'll take all day. That just means he'll turn into Marcus Russell, and it'll break my heart. The one thing I want to double down that you said that I think is really important, I've actually, look at me, I'm going to be an insider for a second. I've talked to some people at the highest level in college football to figure out what his name, image, likeness value actually looks like. The peak anybody I've talked to can get it to per year, if he were to come back with the TV revenue and all of that put together, is around $14 or $15 million. That's a ton of money for a college football quarterback. That's nowhere near what he gets the day he signs in the NFL. So I do think there are positions in college football where name, image, like this will factor into the draft decision, not the top overall pick, not the quarterback position. You mentioned the Broncos. We've got to get to some peeling back the curtain. We've got some, is there truth to this? Is there reality behind it? Or are we all just reacting too hard to social media, to some of the biggest stories across the landscape of the NFL? We will get to that coming up. Welcome back to Inside Coverage. Jori Epstein, Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz, and I love having you guys break some of this down because I'm Kermit the Frog over here going, every story, and you guys bring actual logic and fact. So let's take a look at some of the biggest stories across the landscape of the league and figure out, when we peel back the curtain, is there something here? Is there not something here? And, I want to start with fake accounts, all right? Because I'm going to just throw myself under the bus. I sent you guys a text message, and I was like, oh, my God, are owners really upset about Miami running up the score against Denver? And immediately I found out that I, Jori, am a sucker. At the end of the day, I'm a sucker. I fell for it.
I feel like the three of us are in different camps here. It's like, C-Rob sees it. He's like, one, that's BS. And two, I'm going to tell everyone on Twitter it's BS because you're not credible and I am. Then you have Fitz who's like, that's crazy. Let's go discuss it with all my friends. And then you have me who totally misses it. And by the time you guys are debating whether it's true, I'm like, wait, was that a thing? I never saw that in the first place. So it is really a microcosm of our society on this podcast. Love the diversity of perspective.
Yeah, I was, by the way, I didn't mean to call Fitz a sucker. Like I wasn't.
It's okay if you did.
I was. There were when I saw the tweet. Right. First
I like the transparency here. We all know where we stand.
Oh yeah.
When I saw that you're paying attention, you could accuse me of not even paying attention.
You instantly see. I first became aware of it. I saw a big account interact with it. Right, an account I follow, and I'm like, what the hell? I'm like, who is this? And it wasn't a reply. It was a quote tweet. When you quote tweet someone, you're now sending it out. You're using the power of your account to now go, here, let me show this to everyone else. And when I saw the name of who it was, I was like, I don't know who the hell that is. Then I saw they supposedly work in... And if
C-Rob doesn't know you?
Oh, yeah. I saw they worked in Tallahassee, okay? And no offense to Tallahassee, but not exactly... It's not a hub of where all the NFL information in America collects, okay? And then number 3, they said they got in touch. This was, it was like what, Monday morning, that they had talked to I talked to a few NFL owners, bunch of NFL owners. And the feeling is, I'm like, really? You talked to a bunch of NFL owners? Okay. All right. Congratulations. Because there's maybe 2 people in our space who can just go talk to a bunch of NFL owners on a Sunday night. F off. Like, come on, get out of here. And I sit there and I watch other accounts.
Like, if you want to be believable, don't claim to have talked to a handful of owners.
Yeah, I mean, come on. This is just completely ridiculous. That should be the number one red flag when someone just drops, oh yeah, I talked to a few NFL owners. First off, the people who can do that don't even say that sentence.
Right. If you're trying to say it, you can't.
Yeah, exactly. But then beyond that, it's the information itself that everyone's mad that Miami blew out Denver. Honestly, I think it's the opposite. I think coaches across the league were pissed off that Sean Payton broke a coaching code when he talked about Nathaniel Hackett. And then you get the instant karma in season where, hey, he says historically bad, coaching job. And now you just had a historically bad coaching loss. That's how you break the code. That's how the karma works. I don't think everybody was necessarily pissed off that, there was a little bit of comeuppance so quickly for Sean Payton in that situation. But this whole sharing stuff without people looking at these accounts, and it's not the only one. We kind of talked about this before the show today. I got another one today where somebody in the media, credible, reaches out to me and asks me a question about something that had been thrown up by someone who bought a blue check mark, is clearly has no information, and they just created a fake graphic about a trade that's not happening, and it got shared by a bunch of people on Twitter. God, we got to stop with this, man. This is driving me crazy.
I'm so glad you brought this up, though, because I think you make 2 really good points. One is, if you think people are concerned about...
Only 2? I'm insulted.
Only 2. I have 2 points off of your myriad really good points. The first is that you think people are mad at Mike McDaniel? No, he's the one who's almost like the hero coming back to get Sean Payton after he insults Nathaniel Hackett the way he did. And oh, by the way, Mike McDaniel and Nathaniel Hackett are both part of this broader McVay-Shanahan coaching tree. So I don't think he was doing it for that reason. And I think that he even said, we don't want to get the record in the wrong way, blah, blah, blah. But no, I don't think people are concerned about it. And then my other thing is, so as y'all know, I was a Cowboys reporter for 7 years in Dallas. And as at least C-Rob knows, we had a lot of personalities on the beat there. A lot of personalities. So I'm coming in there. I'm like the only woman who's a writer. I'm much younger than most of them. And they're giving each other a very hard time about everything. Nothing was off limits in what we made fun of in that room. And so I would make a couple of sassy comments in there. And what the guys would always say to me is, "Oh, so Jori, you're in the game now? You're in the game?" Their point being that if I was going to make fun of them, they were going to make fun of me and I shouldn't get offended, which I wasn't. I was like, yeah, like that's okay. And like, we've still got texts, like even from this training camp of like, I'll like make fun of one of the ESPN stories and he's making fun of, oh, congrats on your story on the trend that meant nothing and wasn't actually new, blah, blah, blah. Like, we don't hold back. So I say all of that because if Sean Payton wants to be in the game, be in the game. If you want to come after Nathaniel Hackett and say it's the worst coaching job in history, all of these things go wrong, there was no adults in the room, blah, 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 then when you have a reporter ask you after this game about a historic loss, don't cut off the question. Don't act like this is unfair, because that question was way more fair and way more within the realms of the NFL culture than what Sean Payton did. And so personally, I don't think that people should do what Sean Payton did, but if he's going to, then face the questions and be like, look, you're right. This was a historic loss. That's on me. Like don't cut off the question. Like, I just feel like it doesn't make him look particularly tough and strong in his beliefs if he can't take the questions after he's dishing things out.
In fact, if you haven't heard it, this is Sean Payton after the game at the press conference, getting a little in his feels.
I'm aware.
Third time the team has scored 70 points, over 700.
What's the question?
I mean,
what's the question?
How do you feel about it being
I just finished telling you.
Historically embarrassing.
Next question.
I'm aware. That was my favorite. I'm aware. Someone made him aware. Mike McDaniel made him aware of how bad this was going to be.
I watched the game.
I think this is the moment, though, y'all, where, like, I know I've been harsh on my expectations for the Broncos this year. I have been very clear that I think the Broncos are going to suck this year. But fine, Sean Payton should get every chance to turn it around long term. I don't know how you turn it, like your locker room just watch you get your ass kicked that way. I don't know how you turn that around quickly, right? Like we hear this all the time that after huge, devastating losses, coaches get questioned by the guys in the locker room. If your message is we're going to do things the right way and we're going to build this, blah, 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 you just got your ass whooped. Like, I don't know how you suddenly turn that around to the people in that locker room.
So the message was, I talked to somebody about this, like what exactly happened after Sean Payton comes off the field and you go in and you talk to the locker room. The message was to his players, we got to get to the Bears. Like we can't leave this taste in our mouth. We got to go out. We got to get to the Bears right away. We got to get out there and play a game. But also, we're going to grind this week. Like we're going to watch all that tape. We're going to absorb all that pain. This is not going to be the one where we just burn the tape and go, let's forget it. No, I don't want to forget any of this. I just left Russ out there for the entire game. You know, we got destroyed and I did not pull Russ at any point. We're going to go through all this and everybody's going to take their whooping on this one. And then we're going to get out to the Bears and we're going to turn this around on the field, which is really what they have to do. If you lose to the Bears at Soldier Field, particularly when the Bears are falling apart in the way that they are, now you're talking about a potentially epic slide, which if you look at the last two teams that gave up 70-plus points, with 66 Giants, 50 Baltimore Colts, I think it was the Colts, I want to say, went 1-11 or I think they went 1-11. They were dissolved in January after that season and did not exist for 3 years after giving up that 70-plus point game. And then the Giants, I think, went 1-12-1. I mean, but you're talking about historically bad seasons typically are tied to teams that give up 70 points. Real quick, though, some props to Mike McDaniel for the smooth killer move of not only do you go out and destroy Denver, not only do you put the code back into its place, but then you pull your punch at the end. Like, it's like the movie where you're watching the parking lot. It's like the movie where you're watching the parking lot fight between the bully and the nerd kicks the shit out of the bully. And then he has a chance for the kill shot in front of everybody. And he goes, I'm not going to do it. And he walks off an even bigger hero because he didn't deliver the kill shot. Everybody remembers it.
The man knows what he's doing.
He does. Mike McDaniel absolutely knows what he's doing. And not kicking that field goal and, you know, establishing a new NFL record for points scored, it was a bigger hero moment than had he done it. He kept the narrative in his favor.
You guys both know the Broncos defense more than I do. And I want to ask you guys, like, in terms of how that defense is set up, is speed not an emphasis for them? And I asked that because I was rewatching the game yesterday because I'm working on a story on one of the Dolphins running backs. And I know that the Dolphins have this track team of a football team. And I get that they're super fast, but the Broncos defense looked exhausted and winded in like the first quarter. And then it looked worse in the second quarter. And you see that and you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense that this got out of hand. Is this just something that the Dolphins are always just going to win to every defense in the league? Or are the Broncos, from a speed standpoint, just really bad matchup on top of it?
No, but I will say, and I'll let C-Rob answer this, but I just have to interject quickly. The defense was supposed to be something that they felt like they could at least bank on this year, right? Like, we can't now pivot what the expectations were for the Broncos for months, because what we're realizing is that people were seeing the Broncos through Sean Payton rose-colored glasses, right? Like, oh, this is a playoff team. They're going to take a huge ascension forward. No, this is a bad team. This has been a bad team for several years, but they do have talented pieces on the defensive side of the ball. See, Rob, like, they shouldn't get their asses kicked like that by anybody. Like, there's more individual talent on that side of the ball than showed on that game.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you see Patrick Surtain II give up a long touchdown to essentially a bench player when they put the backups in, it's because he made a mistake, and obviously that was late in the game. But as you said, Jori, yeah, there was a definite speed differential between the two. Now, the question is that more a Dolphins thing or is that more a Broncos thing? The Dolphins, it was funny. I was talking to a GM and he was like, it's the new space race. He called it the new space race. He said, look at the space on the field and you're track racing these guys every single snap. You're chasing these guys every single snap. And he's like, and if it gets out of hand, you're going to be wiped by halftime.
Yeah.
Your team is going to be running IVs while you're trying to make adjustments at halftime just to keep people hydrated. He said, particularly if you're in Miami, of all places. Like, this is the worst kind of team to face in that place of all places. I'll say this about Denver, and I don't want to get into the autopsy right now because it's not fair. We're 3 games in. We'll know more by the end of the season. Denver did run a physical camp, though. They ran. I felt like when I went through, they had been already in a lot of padded practices where they had opportunities. They'd put guys through, at least half pads, full pads. Sean Payton ran a really tough camp. And sometimes I think when you see teams collapse in some way where they look winded, and that shouldn't happen from week to week, I don't think. Some people will point to camp and go, our camp was just too hard. We were worn out already by the time we got to the season. We ground it way too much. I wouldn't be surprised if that's some of the excuse making, maybe by a player or two here in the background down the line. I don't know if it's fair to really say that now after only 3 games, but those are things that you're ultimately going to think about. I don't think speed-wise it's built to be a failure of a defense. We've never complained about speed on the Broncos defense prior to this. The general manager didn't change. There wasn't a wholesale turnover of the defensive roster. I think what changed is they ran into a Miami team that's doing something that other franchises are noticing in terms of their spacing and forcing teams to run and just gas themselves trying to keep up.
I can't unthink about the concept that Caleb Williams to the Dolphins could be somewhere in the ethos. So, Caleb Williams to the Broncos.
Oh my
so
God!
I'm now rooting.
Thank you.
I'm now rooting for. I need the Broncos to win some games. I need the Broncos to start winning some games. Turn this defense around. I mean,
Fitz, even that mistake,
yeah,
even that flub. Like, what do you in this culture of things that get shared? What do you do? there we go. If you go in and you take Fitz, all right, and you just clip that audio right after he finishes saying Dolphins and then tweet it out, Jason Fitz says, I'll be like, that's Jason Fitz from ESPN.
I will toot my
Yeah,
own
you
horn.
heard Jason Fitz thinks that Caleb Williams has a better offseason nutrition diet plan. He's been working out harder in the offseason. Like, we can get all of the Tua sites in here.
Look, I'm not mad if it makes me go vibe. Look, people start listening to the show because of it, then it was a win for everybody. I will toot my own horn, though.
Who needs credibility anyway?
Not this guy. That y'all are here for the credibility. I'm just here to, I'm a schmuck in front of a mic. I will say this, though. I did in all of my fantasy leagues, thanks to the years spent covering college football. I pounced on Devon Achane, who was always Devon Achane when I read his highlights in college, but find out now that he wants it Achane. So sorry about that. Devon Achane is in all of my fantasy leagues, my keeper leagues. I went out. He was my pick this year. So feeling frisky. Woo! Feeling frisky after that weekend.
Well, if it's 1, great call, and 2, that's who I'm writing my feature on this week. So definitely stay tuned, and anyone who's listening, because that was sort of my question is, obviously, he's not going to have 230-something yards from scrimmage and 4 touchdowns every game. This guy is a rookie. It's crazy they even trusted him on things like that no-look shovel pass in the red zone. I don't know how you trust a guy who's not proven it yet at the pro level. That said, I wanted to understand, how much does this reflect the Broncos defense and how much does this reflect what he can do and how well he fits in Miami? And I talked to a couple scouts about that this week, and it'll be in my story, but I do think it's really interesting just sort of the comps they're making and also why they believe that this is not the end of what we're going to see from him. That just sort of like stands out in his rookie year.
Look at I cannot wait to read it because I'm telling you, if you go back and watch his college career, one of the most electric players I've ever read highlights on repeatedly week after week. All right, not electric, Zach Wilson. In fact, I'll go back to my college roots on this one, too. Part of the reason I've never been a believer in Zach Wilson is I interviewed him right after his big blow-up season at BYU that was great. And I asked him, remember, that was a COVID year where all of a sudden they were scheduling opponents on just a few days' notice. He'd never had performance like that. His skyrocketed, right? So I talked to him in an interview, and I was like, Zach, what changed this year? Why did everything suddenly click? His answer was, I don't know. I haven't really changed anything, and I'm doing. And I'm thinking, man, if you had one explosive year in the middle of COVID, you can't tell me why. I don't buy that for long-term NFL success. Maybe I've been right twice because it doesn't look like it's any good. Obviously, Jets fans are freaking out about it, but maybe they should also be freaking about what head coach Robert Saleh had to say. Check out coach's comments about Zach Wilson.
He's our unquestioned quarterback, guys. Like, as long as he continues to show the way his preparation, the way he's been practicing, and even in these games, guys, like, he's not the reason why we lost yesterday. It's always a team effort. And as long as he continues to show improvement, and I know it's not from a box score standpoint, it's not showing anything. It's not showing. He's going to be our quarterback.
I mean, C-Rob, you're making faces during that. Any thoughts on those comments?
I think you got to be careful if you're Robert Saleh. Like, I get what he's doing, okay, and he's saying he's trying to spread it out. He knows we're going to start Zach next week. Maybe we're going to start him a week after that. So he's trying to say, look, we're all in this together. We're not going to point at one guy and say that's the reason why we lost. You have to understand, Robert Saleh knows the market he's in, okay? And anything Robert Saleh says that's remotely incendiary, if it's even picking at a scab, okay, it's going to get absolutely blown up in the New York market like you wouldn't believe. I'm sorry, they're dragging out Joe Namath at this point to absolutely eviscerate Zach Wilson. No offense, Joe Namath means a lot in the market. What he says resonates in the fan base. He's a legend in the franchise. Joe's not in practice, okay? He's not in the locker room. He's not breaking down film 24/7. And yet what Joe says ends up being this massive news cycle in New York. I think it was very frustrating for the team when that ultimately happened. And but I think Saleh, the danger you get into with Saleh is you fall back into what happened in 2022. You cannot continue to say or make it feel like there's less responsibility on Zach, or we're going to share the responsibility constantly, because at some point you get a defense that goes, we're out there doing everything we can. We're killing ourselves to try and win a game. We just need a guy to be able to move us in position for a field goal, or we just need a guy to be able to put together one drive that can ultimately change the face of this game. And Zach is struggling and has not been able to do that. He's walking a tightrope, Robert Saleh is. And we've seen the reports out there now in the last 24 hours that there's supposedly some frustration on the end of the defense. I don't discount that. I think it's natural. Of course, there would be frustration amongst individuals. What you don't want it to slip into is what it slipped into last year, which was almost outright defiance and disrespect of Zach Wilson when they moved to Mike White, and you had people in the locker room basically throwing a ticker tape parade like this is what they had been waiting for. And real quick, I'm done here with this. The reason why the Jets are walking this tightrope right now is that I think they know if you bench Zach now for whoever, Trevor Siemian, you go out and you sign him, whoever you bench him for, it's done. Okay. Like, there is no resurrecting Zach Wilson at that point. His career in New York, I think, really is effectively finished unless there was some miraculous injury situation that once again put him back into the starting lineup and he turned things around. Like, this is a big deal the next time he goes to the bench for the Jets.
Right. I mean, you look at it, and on one hand, you see what he's doing. You see how there are times when he doesn't have much time in the pocket. He doesn't have that pass protection. But then there are also times where he does have a cleaner pocket and he's not seeing his open targets, or he's getting that safety at the end of the game. He's throwing 2 yards on 4th and 10 at the end of the game. Like, he's missing pretty key opportunities. So I think it's hard because the Jets knew, and they were honest with themselves going into the season, that this is a player who they believed had potential long-term viability, but not viability this season. And then what were they supposed to do after Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles with four snaps in? And so I think you also have to keep the Aaron Rodgers perspective in mind with every decision that's being made here and every comment that's being made here, because everything they're saying about Zach Wilson and what's going wrong is not only about what they're going to do this year, it's about what they're going to do next year. And I don't think like, oh, this season is over for the Jets. And I get that they've got talent, but first of all, in terms of bringing other quarterbacks in, and yes, they brought Trevor Siemian in as a potential veteran option, you still have a really you have pretty significant offensive line and particularly pass protection issues. And quarterbacks can only do so much. And a quarterback coming in without that sort of background in this offense can only do so much. But then also, let's say you actually think the problem is that offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett and quarterback Zach Wilson just sort of aren't on the same page. Hackett designed a more Rodgers-friendly scheme for this year, and that's what the issue is. Well, you can't get rid of Hackett if Rodgers is coming back next year. And I'm not saying they should, but I'm saying you have to keep that in mind. Okay, let's say you try and do something else. Well, maybe you think that Zach Wilson is still your best backup next year for Aaron Rodgers. And then it's hard because you talk about the locker room losing confidence in him. And it's like, this is not a hypothetical. We're 9-10 months removed from them going out to this game and wearing shirts that said Mike F and White when they like their other quarterback better. So this is some real stuff. Now, what I will say is, like, going into last week, I was out at the Jets. I was in their locker room. And I do think that the players were expressing confidence pretty strongly. The problem is then you see their sideline and they start, you see the bickering between Garrett Wilson and Zach Wilson. You see some of the conversations between coaches and players, like a little bit of tussles toward the end of the game. The frustration is mounting. So I think as much as you have Aaron Rodgers going on the Pat McAfee show and saying, like, guys, like, let's band together, stay strong. And you do have players saying that the sense of calm that Aaron Rodgers brought to the locker room and the offense, not only just in terms of intangibles then, but also in terms of the way he explained the offense and helped everyone understand it better in ways that Zach Wilson is not able to do at this stage in his career, and most quarterbacks never will be. I think that is helping, but I do think there just comes a point where it's so hard because we were talking in Houston about having CJ Stroud and Will Anderson on these rookie contracts. That's what the Jets have in Garrett Wilson and in Sauce Gardner. And like, how many years of that rookie contract and those like cheap, really high-end caliber talent players are the Jets going to waste?
The only thing I would say to both of you, everything you've said makes sense and it's well thought out. My only argument is that all of this was predictable, all of this was avoidable, and all of this is the Jets' fault. Because you had to know when you go into a season, especially even with an older quarterback, but in general, when you go into the season, you've got to prepare for worst case. There was always going to be a worst case scenario that involved Aaron Rodgers missing some time, because that's just the modern NFL. And the minute that happens, you put Zach Wilson in this situation. I don't disagree with what C-Rob said earlier, that it's done. I think the problem is this is like a bad relationship where they've held on too long. It was already done. There was never going to be a way that they were going to put Zach Wilson back in where Zach Wilson wasn't eventually going to have to answer these tests and answer these questions. And I just don't think he can answer those tests given what's up against him. Like the court of public opinion was already out on Zach Wilson. They should have gotten rid of him. They should have kept White and gotten rid of Wilson this summer.
I get it. I get that argument. I do understand that. I just think they thought they had a relationship counselor who was going to last more than 4 snaps. I think they thought, it's like you get ready and you're going in and we're going to solve some things and you're going to start digging in, and you're 4 minutes into your session and they get called out by the assistant and they don't return. They're done. That was your session. You had 4 minutes. I mean, like, I get it. I do. I understand the argument. And you're right. You put yourself in this situation through your own assessment. I saw what they were reaching for. Rodgers, that went wrong, right? It happens. It's awful. Zach feels like it's going wrong. It's hard to be a Jets fan. I do. I get it and I understand it. But it's also hard for me to hammer on Saleh, right? It's hard for me to hammer on
right.
Joe Douglas, the general manager there, because I'm sitting there going, they really tried to set their best foot forward. They did all these things to try to make this happen. If there's anything I guess I would complain about, is I would say, I don't know, maybe you go to work harder on the offensive line, but every single team struggles in the offseason to really go to work in a meaningful. It takes multiple off seasons to improve an offensive line that's struggling. So it's sucks, bad spot. And Robert Saleh, I think, is trying to do his best, and that's what you get paid for, trying to hold this whole thing together. Trevor Siemian, I would be shocked if he does not end up playing starting snaps for them at some point. And
that's wild. I mean, you're right, but that's why when you say that, like, you're right, but that's wild.
I mean, because that's the thing. It's like, to me, if you're saying, well, what could they have done to the offensive line? Like, yeah, maybe in their first round, they could have taken an offensive lineman instead of taking an edge rusher. But also, okay, would that person have been ready this year to play at a high level? And by the way, it's like, I think it's much more fair when we criticize teams for not finding the insurance, for not going out and putting their best foot forward. And then we're like, well, what did they think was going to happen? They didn't try and get A, B, or C. The Jets did try. And I think maybe you could say, should they have brought every member of the Green Bay Packers in the last 7 years over to the team who might not have that chemistry with another quarterback? That could be another area where you could have questions about, even though a lot of those guys I happen to really like personally. But I think beyond that, I just think that, like, if you lose your quarterback in the NFL, that's all you got. Like, I don't think you can play scared of losing your quarterback in terms of the game. Now, we are seeing that teams are making contract decisions being scared of a running back injury, but I think that with the quarterbacks, that's just not how the NFL is going to be run. If the Chiefs lose Patrick Mahomes, they're not going to the Super Bowl.
I totally agree with that. I think that's fair. I think you also had to realize that this year particularly, there was never going to be a time you could put Zach Wilson on the field. So if you're going to keep him, you got to bring a third quarterback in the room. And in a world where Gardner Minshew's out here starting games and winning games, in a world where Andy Dalton's out here, like, those are not inspiring names. They ain't Zach Wilson.
And,
like
that is, I want to be careful here, but I don't that actually I think is a conversation that probably could have been had. You know, where you go to Zach and you go, look, we're bringing Aaron in. You're going to learn from Aaron, but we want this to be a total reset year for you. Okay. We don't want you to, like, this is literally a red shirt year for you. We're going to bring in another quarterback. Technically, you're going to be our third quarterback, but you have to understand you're going to be our third quarterback who we're doing this for a reason. We're starting this process for a reason for you and having the whole conversation and the buy-in, but you're also paying him, right? I mean, you know, he was the second overall pick in the draft. Hard to take a guy and just deactivate him who's still earning second pick overall salary, which is guaranteed money. That's not a small amount. And it probably robs a little bit from the quarterback you go to sign to be his backup. But good backup quarterbacks nowadays make good money. You know, you're talking $7-8 million for a good backup quarterback. How much money are you going to devote to one position?
All right. Well, we'll keep breaking it down as we do every single week. You guys can follow us on Twitter. It's Charles Robinson, at Charles Robinson. That's one's easy. At Jori Epstein. Hey, Jori, when's the article go up on Davante?
Probably Friday. I'm supposed to talk to Texas A&M head coach Jimbo Fisher on Thursday. So if that's happening, we will wait for after that.
Look at that. And then, of course, Stone doing God's work behind the glass. At SJ Rochelle for Stone, our producer extraordinaire. You can follow me too, at Jason Fitz. I'm back tomorrow with Zero Blitz. You don't want to miss that. C-Rob, tell everybody how they can help support Terez Paylor's legacy.
Yeah, shout out to Terez Paylor, one of the co-founders of our show. Check out breakingtea.com/Terez. That's capital T and Breaking Tea for the All Juice Tea or hoodie. Remember that proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also contribute to that scholarship directly, as well as the one in Terez's name at the University of Missouri. And just a quick little side note. So I had a nice email from someone. I got to email this guy back. Maybe he'll hear it on the pod, but he was kind of going through it. He's had some things going on with his family. He was struggling. He was telling me he was at a hospital, was really kind of dealing with something. He said he was walking across a parking lot wearing the All Juice hoodie, having a really rough day. And someone from across the parking lot saw the t-shirt and he yelled to him. I think it was a t-shirt or hoodie. He said, hey, he yelled to him from across the lot. He said, I love Terez too. Great guy. Mentioned the All Juice thing. And he was like, it totally made him feel, he was like, it made him feel great. Like in that moment.
I
was
have
like,
chills.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that was neat.
That's incredible. Again, breakingtea.com, and it's the letter T/Terez. That's where you can go out and get the shirt or the hoodie My hoodie's super soft and fluffy. I recommend it for everybody. Also recommend you guys leave us that 5-star review, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, your enemies, tell everybody to hang out with us. We will be back next Wednesday with more inside coverage. On behalf of everybody, thanks for hanging out with us.